Thinking like a historian, the historian's toolkit. These are things that we're going to be doing throughout the year in U.S. history to try and help you do a better job of demonstrating all of the standards required for this class. So, first things first, we're going to read a bunch of documents this year in class. Before you start reading any document, what I want you to do is prepare to read by looking at the document. Read the title, the heading of the document, and then predict what do you think you're going to learn from the document. What prior knowledge do you have about the document based on the title? Hypothesize what the document will be about. The next thing is to question. What are the themes and ideas for the document? As you're reading, what words and references do you not know? What claims does the author make? What evidence is present in the document? And then clarify. Assess your own understanding of the text. Answer any questions you may have by corroborating the document with another document. Clear up any confusion you may have about the document through research and/or discussion with others. Finally, summarize. List the main ideas, the who or the what, that are important enough to include in the summary. Tell the most important thing about the who or what. And then cross out any main ideas as you reread the statements that you decide not to include. Connect any statements that should go into one sentence. State the main idea in 10 words or less for a paragraph, or 3 sentences or less for an excerpt. So if you're only reading a paragraph, you should be able to do it in 10 sentences. If you're reading an excerpt that's a couple pages long, you give yourself 3 sentences to summarize it. All right, when we're using historical documents, we will also use the historical thinking chart, which is this. We're going to talk a lot about sourcing, contextualization, corroboration, and close reading in our classes. You will have a paper copy of this historical thinking chart. It is also posted in Google Classroom for you. So you'll have all the tools you need. You just need to use the tools. So sourcing, again, there are other videos about this, but basically you want to know who wrote it, why did they write it, when did they write it, where was it written, what is the author's perspective, and then I would argue the most important question, is it reliable? Why or why not? The next thing to do is contextualization. You got to put the document into context. When and where was the document created? What was different then? What was the same? How might the circumstances in which the document was created affect its content? Let's skip a couple of videos for you there. Corroboration. What do the other documents say? So you got to look up other documents. What do they say? Do the documents agree? If not, why? What other possible documents are there? And what documents are the most reliable? Then you need to close read. Identify as you're reading what claims does the author make? What evidence does the author use to support their claims? What language does the author use to persuade the document's audience? And how does the document's language indicate the author's perspective? Again, that's all the same things from the historical thinking chart. On the historical thinking chart, they do give you some more prompts and some things that you should be able to do. So I have some practice in here. You can do that on your own later. Again, when we're sourcing, those are the questions, what we should be able to do, and then some writing prompts. So if you are asked to source a document, you should be able to answer those questions. You should be able to identify the author's position, hypothesize what they mean, and then you should be able to write about it. Same thing with contextualization. Okay. Again, you should be able to answer all the questions. You should be able to understand the context of the document, and then, of course, write a short summary about it. Corroboration, again, you should be able to identify other documents that work with your document that you're researching and say whether they agree or not. If they don't agree, why not? If they do agree, why? And then, of course, that would be your short writing prompt from corroboration. Close reading, same thing. You have a number of questions to answer, what you should be able to do, and then you should be able to explain what the author is trying to convince you of. Okay. And then there are some other things we're going to do. We'll analyze sources. We'll look at how to analyze a photograph. We'll analyze artifacts. We'll analyze political cartoons. We'll analyze historical maps. And of course, we need to understand and identify that bias is present in everything. So when we're going to read again, remember we need to predict, question, clarify, and summarize. What we're going to use for U.S. history this year when we are reading the text is we're going to use a note-taking strategy called starting the conversation. Again, at the start, we're going to enter the text by looking at the title of the chapter or the section or the document they're reading. We're going to look through and see if there's any pictures. If there are, we're going to try and look at those quick. And then we want to say, what do I already know about this topic? I'm going to make a prediction about what I think the topic is going to be about. And we're going to try and make sure that we get a deeper understanding of what we're reading. Again, that gets us to the next part, understanding what I read. What are the important or central ideas in the chapter? And then the key is to look at the subheadings to help direct you towards the important ideas. So in the first column, any important or central ideas in this chapter. The easiest way to do that when you're reading, like, say, a U.S. history textbook is to write any of the subheadings. So you got your chapter title, and then you've got all the different headings. I would write those in the first column. And then in the middle column, I would write key supporting details and important ideas that help explain each of those central ideas, those chapter or subheadings or headings that you find while you're reading. And then while you're reading, if questions come to mind, that's where you write those in the third column. Okay, and you can often go back and reflect on what you've written and say, well, wait, now I have a question about this. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bunch of boxes while you're reading for trying to read for the U.S. history textbook and take notes on it. And again, I would do each subheading as its own box, and you can write down the main ideas, and that'll help you really get into the text. The last thing I'm going to have you do for note-taking while you're reading is to go back and think about the text when you're done and answer these questions. Number one, what information is new or changes my understanding of the topic? If it's not new information, but it gives you another way to think about it, that's where you need to write that down. Okay? If it's new information, you've never heard of it before, again, you need to write that down. Number two, are there ideas in this text that conflict with other ideas I have read or seen? Is there anything that you're like, wait a minute, I thought this was something else, right? Or I heard this when I was in middle school. Well, okay, so this is where you say, okay, we need to look at some of those conflicts and see if we can resolve them by corroborating, right? And number three, how can I use the information presented in this text? Hopefully you can use the information to build a project, write an essay, write a reflection, and of course answer questions on the test. Number four, what information do I need to look for moving forward in the text to answer some of my questions? Again, if you are like, well, I'm not so sure what this section was about or how this relates to, the bigger topic of study, that's where you need to say on question 4, this is what I need to look for in the future. And then the last question, how does this support the learning target? Our learning targets are always our standards. So for the last question, you need to be able to say how it relates to our main standard of focus for that unit. Okay. We're going to have an assignment with this. I'll have you practice this. We'll work through it together. And then hopefully by doing that once and working through it together, you'll be able to move forward as we go through in class and do this on your own and have a better understanding of how to do better in class. Last thing I want to talk about is taking notes from lecture, right? A lot of the class I'm going to do a lot of lecture, we'll watch videos, we'll do some other activities, maybe have guest speakers, all kinds of things like that. And of course, you guys will all get a chance to present and take notes from each other. So the big question first is, what type of notes do we have to take? And do we have to take notes? Yes, you do have to take notes. And we are going to use the Cornell method. Okay, if you want to modify it a little bit, that's fine, but I'm going to require some form of the Cornell notes. So why take notes? Well, number one, to study for the test, to remember what you've learned, to provide yourself with ideas for writing a paper or working on a project, and because you're required to take notes for this class. The other reason I don't have on here is every test is open handwritten note. In other words, you can use the notes you're required to take for this class on every test. Okay. There are many ways to take notes. I have an explanation on how to take notes. I want you to try out different methods of note taking within the Cornell Notes framework to determine what works best for you. Key thing is, good notes are useful notes. So I want you to take good notes, but I want them to be useful. So then is, what are useful notes? Well, useful notes help you learn. Useful notes capture the main ideas and important details. Useful notes are summarized after class, or in the case of what I'm going to have you do most days, the last few minutes of class. So you can have your summary written, and then that'll be your exit ticket for class a lot of days. To make the most of your notes, you do need to review your notes after class sometime in the same day. So as you go from U.S. history to your next class, you could be reviewing the notes, or when you get in your next class, if you have a few minutes here or there, and it only takes 5 to 10 minutes, is usually more than enough time. You should be able to get it done in 5 minutes, where you review your notes, fill in any additional information or details that you might have missed, and then of course clarify your notes. Immediate review on the same day of your notes is the most important step to actually learning the material. It makes you come back and cement it in your brain that day, and then you'll remember it a lot more easily than if you don't look at it again until you're trying to use your notes on the test. Okay, so how do you take Cornell notes? To take Cornell notes, I'm going to have you use your paper. I'm going to actually provide you with notebooks, and you're going to divide each page into 3 sections. They'll have a large note-taking column. Usually it's on the right-hand side of the page, about 2/3 of the width of the page. A smaller Q column, which is about 1/3 of the width of the page. And then at the bottom, I want space for a summary, where you're going to write basically what you learned in class that day. During class, you need to record notes in the note-taking column. Don't write everything I say or everything that's listed on the screen. You want to be engaged and actively learning, so you should only write the main ideas, important details, things that will help you remember the information later. While you're doing that, you should be paying attention to the speaker, or if you're doing it as a reading, or if you're using Cornell Notes in a video to take notes from a video, you should be paying attention to that. After class, lecture, or when you have finished reading a section or chapter or finished watching the video on the same day, you should go back and write clarifying questions in the Q column and fill in any missing information that you may have missed. You can write questions in the Q column during class while you're reading, while you're watching, if it helps you keep your attention. And then you need to summarize your notes. Summarizing the notes is a very important step in learning the material, because it's your way of saying, hey, this is what I learned today. And then later, before the next class and or when you're studying for the test, recite, reflect, and review on your notes. Okay, that'll help you prepare for the test. So I have an image here of a nice printed out version of the Cornell notes. Again, yours have to be that detailed, that well organized. You have to measure 1.5 inches from the side. Nope, I'm fine with you using however you need to. But I do want you to take Cornell notes. I've also included in the slideshow a link to Cornell University on how to take Cornell notes. It is really easy to go through and learn about that. Finally, important things to remember about note taking from my class. You're required to take notes. You can use your notes, handwritten notes, on every summative assessment. I will have you turn in the notes from time to time, and exit tickets will often be summaries. That's what we're going to be doing this year.